Barbara and I are running this meeting tonight, this webinar with Geoff Simmons. So let us look at the weather. Whakataka te hao ki te uru. Whakataka te hao ki te tonga. Kia mā kina kina ki atu. Kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi ake ana te ātākura. He tio, he huka, he hauhu, te hei mauri ora. And that says, get ready for the westerly and be prepared for the southerly. It will be icy cold inland and icy cold on the shore. May the dawn rise red-tipped in ice on snow, on frost. And let me introduce a friend.
You want to
Greg
sit closer
Simmons.
up?
I don't. I'll sit right back.
Sorry, Geoff Simmons. Everybody all right? Make sure you've got your computers on mute. Yeah. So, Geoff Simmons has been around for a while in my life. I've found Geoff to be a man of great integrity. He's got true grit and he's a very funny man. He does some improv theatre, which takes a fair bit of skill in acting. He rides his bike, he walks up mountains, and obviously he plants as well. Now, working for the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment means that Geoff can't be involved in politics anymore, but that's fine. He's doing a good job where he is. And tonight he's going to talk to us about Aotearoa's climate targets. Are we off track? That's apparently a very thorny question. But then we'll move on to forestry, which is also a passionate thing for Geoff, and it's not a scapegoat for reducing emissions at source, I guess. Carbon trading, likewise. So thanks for sending that report, Geoff. Everybody's enjoyed reading that very dry document and very recent. So I'll now hand over to you to give us a lovely talk, and Sue Santa Barbara, Joanna Santa Barbara will handle the questions at the end and give the final karakia. Now I'll put myself on mute and hand over to you, Geoff.
Thank you, Bev, and can I thank you for all the work that you've done and continue to do on important matters, and also for your wonderful dress sense, which I appreciate immensely. I draw on Bev's spirit often when I'm thinking about what to wear. So, folks, we're talking about climate targets. Are we on track tonight? And just a bit of background before I start on the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment. So I'm the Chief Economist there. And we are an Office of Parliament, so we are publicly funded, but we don't report to any particular minister. We're a bit like the Office of the Auditor General. So we operate under the Environment Act 1986. And unlike the Climate Commission, which is focused very much on very focused on climate issues, climate change and emissions reductions. Our scope spans the entire environment portfolio. And so, our job is to make sure that parliamentarians are informed about the performance of the environmental management system, if you like. So I will dive into the talk with a horrendous graph, which will hopefully terrify and scare you. But don't worry, I'll talk you through it. So are we on track? The short answer is a bit of yes and a bit of no. It's complicated. And, really the targets that we are hitting are largely because of the tree planting that we've done to offset our emissions rather than real efforts to reduce emissions. That's why the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, Simon Upton, talks about when we do hit our hitting of emissions reductions targets as being an accounting triumph, rather than anything particularly real. So, looking at this graph, I'll try to explain what these different lines mean. First up, starting at the top, we've got a blue line. That is our gross emissions of all gases. Okay, so to include methane in that, we have to find a way of making short-lived gases and long-lived gases equivalent, which is, that is a whole other thorny issue. But that's using the accounting, the international accounting that we have. So that blue line, and then you'll see a dotted blue line above it and a dotted blue line below it, and that's kind of the uncertainty around our gross emissions. Going down to the green line below that, that is our net all gases emissions. So this is using our international target accounting. So this is what we report to, on the Paris Agreement. The purple line below that is our biogenic methane, and really the commissioner, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, is supportive of having a split target on this, because methane can't really be compared to other long-lived to the long-lived gases. It's a short-lived gas, so it makes sense to look at methane separately. And then the orange below that is the net long-lived gases. So we've taken methane out there, and that's the net long-lived gases going forward there. So for our international target accounting, we're using the green line. For our national target accounting, we're using the purple and the orange lines. So this is complicated stuff. So so there's a difference between gross and net, and there's a difference between long-lived and short-lived. So what about the targets? Well, the targets in there are the blue bars are our emissions budgets, and the green bars are our NDC, first NDC, which is our nationally determined contribution. So that's what we promised under Paris. Okay, I'll come to the other coloured bars in a moment. But what can we say about our emissions budgets? Well, the good news is that we are on track on our first emissions budget and our second emissions budget. So that's first budget's out to 2025, second emission budget's out to 2030. But as you'll see, so we're comparing those blue bars up there with that green line that comes down. As you can see, there's a margin of uncertainty around that green line, which means that there is a risk that we might not hit. We may still not hit even our first emissions budget, and we may not hit our second emissions budget either. So this is a question that we have been asking: is how much uncertainty are we prepared to tolerate around achieving our targets? Should we really build in a margin for error on this? So that's emissions budget 1 and emissions budget 2. The less good news is that we're not yet on track for emissions budget 3. Now, that's out 2030 to 2035. Now, the government technically is arguing that that's the job of the emissions budget, the emissions reduction plan that they will submit in 2029. That's the job of that plan, is to meet that budget. But what the Climate Commission is saying is that that's really too late to put the policies in place that you need to meet that budget, because there's a real lag with these things. It takes time for the policies to get in and actually reduce emissions. So they're warning that we need to act sooner in order to reach emissions budget 3. Now to our international targets. Oh, so there's one more national target in there. That's the purple bar that you can see. That's about biogenic methane, and that's a 10% reduction by 2030. And we are, again, just on track to meet that target, that first emissions reduction target for methane. And you'll know that that's not because of any policies we have to reduce agricultural methane emissions. We don't have any policies to reduce those. That is purely the impact of the emissions trading scheme incentivizing forestry. And the land that's forestry is being used is largely sheep and beef land. And so we're seeing reductions in particularly sheep numbers contributing to the afforestation of our landscape. And that is reducing methane emissions, and that's why we're hitting the target. So it's a side effect of if you like, of our emissions trading scheme. Now moving across to our nationally determined contributions, you can tell by the way the green line hits those green bars very much, late, late heading on towards 2030, that we are not on track to meet NDC 1, our first NDC. The green line would have to hit those bars sort of in the middle, so that there's unders and overs over the 10 years of that target for us to hit that target. And that's deliberate. That target was set first by John Key's government and second by Jacinda Ardern's government. They resubmitted it into the Paris framework. And the intention was always that we were going to need to purchase international units to do that. And that was going to be New Zealand's contribution to basically helping poorer countries transition to a lower emissions economy. As you may have seen recently, the government is questioning whether they have the political mandate to send money overseas to purchase overseas emissions reductions. So it doesn't look like we're on track for NDC 1. Are we on track for NDC 2? Well, NDC 2 is an interesting little target. You'll see that's again, the orange bar that's in 2035. It is only marginally tougher than NDC 1. And it's very interesting because it could be considered as easier overall because it only applies in that year only. So at the moment, as you'll see that green line is coming down, it's pretty close to that target in 2035. So it'll need a bit more effort to achieve NDC 2, but it does look doable because it is only in that single year only. So we just need to get emissions down a little bit more in 2035 to meet that target. Sorry for the horrendous graph to kick us off, but that just gives you an overview of all the different targets and all the different accounting mechanisms that we got going on here. It's really, really complicated stuff. And there's lots of uncertainty, and that's something that we are concerned about, is whether we are building in enough of a buffer to achieve these goals. This is taken from the report that was sent through to you. So this is the Climate Commission's summary, and that sort of says the same thing, that we are on track for the first and second budgets, not so much for the third. But what they're pointing out here is that they have recommended revised emissions budgets which are tougher and would make it harder for us to, we certainly wouldn't be on track for meeting even emissions budget 2 if we took those tougher budgets. And they are recommending those budgets to reflect accounting changes. And again, if you've followed climate change for a while, you'll know that there's lots of different complexities in the accounting, and New Zealand has benefited over time from these quirks in accounting and falling in our favour, and this is another example of that. We'll see if the government adjusts the targets, but of course, if they don't, then that accounting change is making our job easier. And this is again from that Climate Commission analysis, which shows the risks around meeting each of those budgets. So there's a bit of risk in built in meeting that second emissions budget, and so that's a question that we have been asking for a while: is should there be more? Should there be a greater buffer built into this so that we have greater certainty that we're going to meet those emissions budgets? The third emissions budget, you can see very clearly there that we're not on track to meet it. That's the grey bit at the top, and the bit that we are doing has significant risk to the delivery. And look, those risks to delivery really boil down to two things, or even one thing, and that's what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the presentation. There are quite big risks with using forestry to offset our gross emissions, because carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere more or less forever. I mean, in human terms, it's basically forever. We need to guarantee that those forests, if we're going to offset the carbon that we're pumping into the atmosphere, those forests need to be there forever as well. And can we really promise that? That's the question that the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment is asking. Can we make that promise? We think, particularly given that a bunch of this is monoculture pine, there are big risks with extreme weather events. We've seen that with Nelson. We've seen that with Cyclone Gabrielle. We still don't know how much forest was lost as a result of those two events, and what the implications for the emissions trading scheme are. But we do know that significant chunks of forestry were lost. There's the risk of drought and wildfire. There's the risk of disease getting in and wiping out a monoculture like radiata pine. We saw that with the pine bark beetle in Canada. So all of these risks, if we are offsetting more and more of our emissions by planting more and more trees on the land, and the longer we go on doing it, the more forest we have to plant, the greater that risk becomes. So it really is a growing risk in our ability to meet our emissions reductions promises. The other big risk in there is that the price of carbon won't be high enough to incentivize the sorts of things that the government thinks will happen to reduce emissions. And one big example of that is carbon capture and storage. So this is the idea that people using fossil fuels to generate electricity, for example, will burn the gas or burn the coal and then capture the carbon dioxide and pump it down into the gas reservoir that they got the gas from. But to do that really requires a carbon price of around, there's some debate over this, but roughly $100 a tonne. And we are unlikely to see that in our emissions trading scheme because of our unlimited use of forestry offsets. Forestry is much more responsive to carbon prices than emissions reductions. Okay, so if the carbon price goes up, we're much more likely to see people plant trees and bring the carbon price down again, rather than people actually invest in reducing emissions. And that's why, we know that, the emissions trading scheme, the sort of prices we see in the emissions trading scheme, have a very small impact on reducing emissions, about 10%, no more than that. So regardless of how you look at it, really, forestry is the source of all of our risks in the emissions trading scheme. So that's why I'm going to spend the rest of this talk talking about that. Just to let you know, Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment has done a bunch of reports in this space. One other report that we did was on the first emissions reduction plan, and we posed a set of questions that any government needs to answer when they're thinking about their emissions reduction plan. I won't read them out. You can look at them. But what we know from this government is that they want to use the emissions trading scheme to be their key tool to reducing emissions. And we also know, given the recent policy changes that they've put through, that they are concerned about the extent of farms that are getting eaten up by forestry. However, the conclusion these questions take you to is that if you don't want forests covering the landscape, the only real way to avoid that, assuming you want to actually, meet our climate reduction goals, our emissions reduction goals, the only way to do that is by having a long-term rising carbon price that actually incentivizes people to bring down emissions. And it seems that we aren't prepared to accept that. So, as a country. So, what we're left with is, if we want to keep the emissions, the carbon price low, then we're just going to see more and more of our land chewed up, being eaten up by carbon forestry. So this is just a summary of the issues we see with the emissions trading scheme being our key policy tool to reduce emissions. So it's really driving land use change through encouraging forestry. As I mentioned before, we question whether forestry is a suitable offset for long-lived gases. We're concerned about who's going to look after these permanent carbon forests once the money from carbon revenue runs out. As I said before, forestry is more responsive than emissions reductions. It depresses the emissions trading scheme price, dampening the impact on reducing gross emissions. We have concerns about the future of the emissions trading scheme, given what forestry will do to the price of emissions in the long term, and the emissions trading scheme won't achieve our climate goals alone. So all of these issues I will take you through, so don't panic too much about taking all these in. I'm going to take you through over the next few slides. So first, this slide just shows you the land change we've seen over the last 20 years. We're getting new data in soon, so yes, it's 2018, it's a bit outdated. But the key thing to note here is that the biggest land use change we've seen in the last 20 years has been exotic afforestation, about 366,000 hectares of additional forest, and that is likely to continue into the future. We've just seen a big spike in planting in 2022, 2023. That's fallen away in recent years, but it's likely to continue at around 30,000 hectares per year for the foreseeable future. So by 2050, that means around about 750,000 hectares of new, mostly pine forest. So this is the biggest driver of land use change in the country, and I think it's fair to ask, are we getting the right tree in the right place as a result of that? And we'll come back to that later on. As I said, we've done some work on on looking at the drivers of afforestation. This is the report Aotearoa Reset was called, and one of the key findings is that everyone wants natives, but doing that at scale is challenging and expensive, and that's why everyone has been using pines because it's so much cheaper to do. The Commissioner has no problem with appropriately sited and well-managed production forests, but to be clear, some places are not suited to clear fell harvesting. We've seen that in Tairāwhiti, and in those circumstances, the forestry industry should be covering the cost of the externalities that they are generating through slash and sediment loss. It's pretty clear that if they were to do that, they certainly wouldn't be operating in some of those areas, or certainly would have to operate in different ways in some of those areas. So moving now from production forestry to permanent carbon forests. If you're using forestry to offset carbon, those forests have to be maintained forever from the risk of fire, disease, extreme weather, all that sort of stuff. And you can understand how production forestry, they have an incentive to replant if something happens. But for those forests that are permanent carbon forests, they're just growing the pine trees purely to store the carbon. You have to wonder, when the revenue runs out from the carbon, how are these forests going to be maintained? In 80 or even less, 70, 80 years, we're looking at real issues in big chunks of the country when, effectively there are large chunks of land where forest is tied up and no one has the revenue to actually look after them. So what we have suggested is that forestry needs to be phased out of the emissions trading scheme. And if forestry was phased out of the emissions trading scheme, that would allow the carbon price to rise. The government would be able to actually sell some credits in its auctions, and that money could be used to incentivise native afforestation. We've suggested creating a separate biogenic trading scheme for methane. That's a whole different conversation, but we think actually, because methane is a short-lived gas, it's reasonable to offset that with forestry, because that is, it's a temporary offset for a temporary impact on warming. So it makes sense in a time sense. Most people say, oh, but trees don't absorb methane, but that's not really the point. This is about warming and offsetting the warming from that. So looking forward to the future of the ETS, we've done some modelling which looks out to the future, and we are concerned about the future stability of the emissions trading scheme. This is this is some modelling which suggests that over the next sort of 10 years, we're likely to see quite a tight market in the emissions trading scheme. So that will incentivise planting of forestry. But when we get to 2035, that forestry is going to continue to grow, and the amount of credits it will generate will get larger and larger as the trees get bigger and bigger. And around about the mid-2030s, we're going to see a few quite big changes, such as the reduction in the use of gas in the country as our gas supplies start to dry up. Of course, that's a pretty contentious issue right now, and also quite large uptake of EVs. We think by that time the cost of EVs will get to the stage where they become the norm. So post the 2030s, you start to see quite big reductions in gross emissions, but at the same time, there's lots more forestry units around, and so as a result, essentially the carbon price starts to fall, and you see it there sort of fall down to zero. It's unlikely that it would fall to zero because then you'd see deforestation. It'll fall to the level that will prevent deforestation, whatever that is. But certainly in the late 2040s or by 2050, the incentive to plant more trees will be gone. And that creates another issue because that means that the emissions trading scheme will get us to net zero 2050. This is basically, a graph of a few different scenarios looking into the future. And what it tells us is that the emissions trading scheme will probably get us to net zero 2050, but it won't keep us there. And this is important because we have promised to get our emissions to zero by 2050 and every year thereafter. So, this is a real long-term concern for the ability of the ETS to deliver our goal. Its goal for the country as our main tool in dealing with climate change. So, there's a real in our view, there's an inevitability about emissions trading scheme reform. The only question is exactly what that reform is, the scale of that reform, and when it happens. So this is something that we think will be a continuing conversation into the future. And another recommendation in terms of ETS reform is that we really need to review the permanent forest category. Like I said, large swathes of the country are being planted in permanent pine forests, and we have a big concern about who is going to manage that forest when the carbon revenue dries up. There is a lot of hype about something called transition forests. So this is the idea that you could plant a pine forest but then let natives take over. But the modelling we've done suggests that if you do that, if you plant exotics and then sort of cut little bits down so you can introduce plant natives in amongst it, you're still going to end up with this quite big drop in carbon happening from about year 30, 40 onwards. So again, how is someone who is funding this with carbon revenue going to be able to afford to do it? We just don't think that the idea really stacks up under the current policy settings. And there's big concerns, there's big questions about whether it's going to work as well. So like I said, we've done a bunch of work in this area, and our ambit is not just related to climate change. We look at the environment more broadly. And the last bit of work I want to touch on is something called Going with the Grain, which we wrote last year. And what we found there was that we did some in-depth work in catchments, and really modeling land use change to achieve a bunch of environmental benefits, because we've got like a tunnel vision about carbon. We've had a tunnel vision about, on carbon for about the past 5 or 6 years. Before that, it was water quality. Now biodiversity is becoming a bit more of a fad too, and adaptation, of course, climate adaptation is growing in importance. So what we at Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment think is that we've got to think about all these issues holistically, biodiversity, freshwater, climate change, including adaptation. And it's really one conversation in New Zealand about land use. And those conversations are best had really close to the land itself, at the level of the people that are on the land and living off the land, as it were. So we think it's really important to involve local people in decisions about land use. What we discovered through the modelling that we did, as part of this project, was that if we were prepared to get slightly less carbon as a result of land use change, or alternatively have a higher carbon price, you could get much better holistic environmental outcomes by making sure you had the right tree, basically the right tree in the right place. So exotic forestry has its place in the appropriate locations, and some places are really best, particularly erosion prone land, are really best for native afforestation, really trying to restore papatūānuku on those most difficult parts of our land, and I'd add to that restoring wetlands at the same time. So thinking about this stuff holistically will deliver much better environmental outcomes as a whole, maybe not just within the silo of climate change, but for our environment in general. And the reason for that, this is just the last slide. The reason for that is because our environmental issues have hotspots, and this is the same for this is a slide showing E. coli, but the susceptibility for just about any form of environmental problem, there's relatively small areas that create a disproportionate amount of environmental damage, because essentially those areas shouldn't be used in the way that they're being used today. And if we really target those hotspots, we can get much better environmental outcomes across the board. So that's my presentation, and I will cancel out of that.
Yeah.
Hello. How do I see you guys again? There we go. All right. So how do we do questions? What's the plan?
I'm just trying to get on to get my video on, Geoff. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And I can see you.
Oh, great. Okay. So we can now open up to all participants for questions. When you have a question, do remember to unmute yourself. And while people are collecting their thoughts to pose a question to Geoff, when you have a question, could you use the raising hand icon, which you will find in at the bottom of your screen, under React, I hope. Okay. Interestingly, Geoff, I made a list of questions to ask at this point in the talk, and you've actually answered every one already. So
My bad
well
for
done.
being so comprehensive.
Right. Well, fortunately, Leslie Hill has a question to start us off. Leslie, please go for it. And
Okay. Can you hear me?
yes, yes.
Okay, it's Budjong Hill here, Budjong and Leslie. So
Bajong.
Budjong's asking the question. Yeah, I was interested, Geoff, in the aspect of forestry, permanent forestry, and the cost to society over a longer period, because people are going to walk away, as you've pointed out. Who's going to cover those costs? The one thing you didn't mention, which I see as a huge cost, and I'd like to hear your comments on it, is wildings. You know, I live in Marlborough, and just a couple of weeks ago, Jim Ward resigned as the manager of Molesworth after 24 years, and he's walking away, and the local people here don't know what's going to happen to Molesworth. Is it just going to end up all in pine trees? And what is the cost to society of a lot of our high country ending up in wilding pines, and the Marlborough Sounds, where millions have been spent getting rid of wilding pines? So interested in your comment.
Yeah, look, absolutely, wilding pines are a massive issue, and you know we spent quite a bit of money, as you say, trying to get them under control, and it seems like we've stopped making. Well, we're still making an investment, but it's not at the level that's needed to keep them under control. The reason I didn't mention wildings is because it's quite complicated. Obviously, there are, there are instances where wildings are created. Wilding issues have been are as a result of recent commercial forestry, but a lot of our wilding problem has actually come from historical government planting right back in the 1930s of of some species that's similar to Pinus radiata but a bit different, things like Pinus contorta and things like that. So yeah, it definitely is an issue. But it's you can't really lay the whole issue at the door of private operators. To be fair to them, a lot of them are doing quite a lot to try and take care of the issue, and a lot of the issue is historic, from government schemes that date back to the Great Depression. So yeah, it's complicated. I mean, as to things like Molesworth being used to plant in pines. So this is a proposal that the government's looking at to plant Crown-owned land in forestry. So this is a way, if you like, of the government to try and mop up some of those emissions that, like I said, the ETS isn't going to keep us under net zero post 2050. And this is one of the options that the government is looking at, to do something outside the ETS, which mops up more emissions. You won't be surprised to hear that, our concern is that this is just creating, more more forestry, which could be, particularly in the case of Marlborough, at risk of wildfire and things like that.
Yeah, I take your point about the historic side of it, but if we look out 50 or 60 years, we'll be saying the same thing about the trees that are planted now, that they were historically not a smart decision.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Brad. Steve Grimson, put your question.
Yeah, kia ora, Geoff. Thanks so much for that. What a great talk. It really clarified a lot of things. I guess I had two questions. First of all, has the Commission had any feedback from the political parties about the idea of phasing out pine plantations out of the ETS? And I guess secondly, have we got a validated way of measuring carbon removal from native plantings?
Yeah. I mean, the response from the government to our recommendation was that they won't be taking forestry out of the ETS, and to be honest, that's exactly what you'd expect them to say. This is, there's a lot of money tied up in the ETS, and it's it's you do need investment certainty to ensure that investment continues into the future. What's really needed is, and this is something that we are going to be working on over the next year, is what's the detailed plan to actually get us out of this mess? What's something that can actually be implemented, which could provide certainty to those people who are invested in the emissions trading scheme, but also ensure that the scheme is sustainable in the long term, which I think everyone is interested in. So I think that's that's going to be a conversation over the next few years. I mean, I have seen the Green Party talking about ETS reform. I can't remember what their proposal is off the top of my head. In terms of native afforestation, inclusion in the emissions trading scheme, I mean, I must preface this answer by saying that we have spent an order of magnitude more on the science of Pinus radiata than we have on our own native trees. Okay? So we just know so much more about pine. That's why it's so efficient. That's why it grows so fast. We haven't had that same investment in our native trees, in the science of them, or in the or in improving their productivity or their growth rates, all that sort of stuff. So there's enormous, there's a big information gap there that we in that LTF reset report. Our point was, if you want to have alternative forestry in this country, we've got to make investments in the science. That said, there are some tables which estimate the amount of carbon that's stored by native forests. They basically, if I'm to summarize massively, they suggest that over the first 50 years of a forest, pine trees soak up 4 times the amount of carbon that native trees do. Now, I'm pretty sure that if we, invested a bit more in understanding native trees and how to plant them and what conditions they really thrive under and all that sort of stuff, we could reduce that. But it's a really big gulf. And when you think that it's cheaper to plant pine compared to natives as well, you can see why anyone who's looking to make a buck out of the emissions trading scheme is going into pine. It's a real gulf. Yeah, so it's challenging.
Can I put a question at this point? Does the recloaking Papatūānuku project have any answers that you feel are worth paying attention to?
Well, I mean, I think it's a very, it's great work that they are doing. They're really trying to establish a constituency for native afforestation on a grand scale. I again haven't seen any proposals out of them about how to fund that. And that's very much why we are focused on reforming the emissions trading scheme as a source of revenue for native afforestation. There's a bunch of different ways you could get the money to do this, and we talk a bit about them in Going with the Grain, but we think the most realistic is reforming the emissions trading scheme. But no, I mean, really, we talk to the guys at Recloaking Papatuanuku, and they're doing great work. But that is really about building awareness of the need to effectively to reforest our erosion-prone land and native trees. It's such an obvious thing that we should be doing. Because it has big environmental benefits more than just carbon, because it'll reduce the amount of dirt running off the land and into our waterways and into our oceans. And it will ultimately improve our resilience when it comes to climate adaptation as well. As we get more and more storms, native forests soak up that water. They're like a sponge, and they release it more slowly. So there's lots of good reasons to do that, and those guys are trying to tell that story of why it's important to do it. The thing that we're focused on is how. How do we actually do it?
Right. Thank you. Kaz, put your question, please.
Oh, okay, thanks. Hi, Geoff. Thank you for your talk. I just wondered if you were familiar with the Miyawaki tiny forest developments and what that has to contribute in terms of holding carbon, resilience of the land, and all those other kinds of things that it talks about as being very useful and also requiring very small amounts of land to develop.
Yeah. I mean, I think that stuff is super exciting. It's to me, it's just another great example of some of the amazing stuff that is happening in some of our cities, where there's enough people to put their attention into relatively small spaces and do amazing things. I guess the question is, how do we scale this stuff? How do you get that happening at real scale? I have to confess, I had to resist having drinks after work tonight to make sure I didn't career off onto any bizarre tangents. But we do. One great example on this is we do have a massive question of what to do with human waste in this country. It's a massive issue around the world, and there's plenty of good evidence that have shown the benefits of growing our native trees in human waste. That's the sort of stuff we need to look at to kind of scale that kind of thinking, and really get native afforestation happening much more quickly.
Can I just ask? I mean, you're talking about scale, but actually the whole point about making change is that you do it piece by piece. And so
Oh.
the tiny forest thing, what it does is it creates a biologically intensive, creative area, which then, of course, spreads around. And it's kind of something that, relatively small groups of people can actually make happen. That don't depend on huge investments and on, all kinds of other things. So, like ignoring it completely is actually taking something very powerful, especially in terms of resilience to climate, because these things resist tsunamis and stuff. It would seem like
No,
a very obvious next step
well,
in a
I'm
bigger
not
thing.
ignoring it. I'm definitely not ignoring it completely. I think it's great stuff. And like I said, you know, we're doing it ourselves up in up in McAllister Park and in Wellington with our restoration planting up there. It is good stuff, and more power to people who do it. We also have 1.1 million hectares of erosion-prone land in New Zealand, and that would be, the ideal would be if that could be, um, uh, restored to its native, native cover. So, that's it's. I'm just trying to show the scale of the challenge here.
I think most things are at an enormous scale of challenge, and unemployment is one of them, of course. People can't get jobs that will pay them to do good things.
Let me turn to Bev Short. Bev, would you like to put your question?
So it's more of a statement, really, after Kaz's comment about Miyawaki. We've got a member, Molly Miliush, who's in our climate declaration, who's inspired me about Miyawaki. And so I had a flooded backyard here in Auckland and Te Atatu Peninsula during one of our storms. I think it was Cyclone Gabriel. Nearly came to the top of the deck. So I thought, right, I've got to do something about this. So I planted Miyawaki in my back garden, but I've also got a few patches in the front. And it's just fabulous to watch these trees all in little a meter square areas growing. And of course, the root systems grow together as one as well, which is why Kaz mentioned that they can be used as tsunami protection. I think that's happened in Japan. I mean, that's on a massive scale. So this has been very exciting for me, but also having lived and worked on the East Coast, Tairāwhiti back in the late 90s, I saw it firsthand how forestry out of control and abandoned by companies that just walk away and leave slash does such terrible damage. I mean, I've driven to work as a nurse early in the morning over half a bridge. And it was much worse after I left there. So the immense scale of getting to unreachable, massive areas in New Zealand is something we have to find an answer to, and it's really serious. Miyawaki is fun and it's got a place, and I think it's important that people try it, and then maybe the idea will spread, and it can help us with Townhouse Nation to bring green up, and it's good for mental health and everything, but the biggest problem we have, and a lot of it's got to do with, Marlborough's problem of wildling pines, is the huge areas of inaccessible, and no matter how many unemployed people there are, how do you get them there? So, yeah, I'm just saying something really sad, actually.
Thank you. Geoff, do you want to respond to that, or shall I go to the next question?
I mean, Bev's raised an important issue around the challenge of Tairāwhiti, and the people there are really grappling with what to do in these. That they've identified some areas where it's just not suitable to have commercial forestry anymore. But how do they get in there and ensure that native trees can take over those areas. It's a massive challenge. Yeah.
Thank you. Matthias?
Thanks, Joanna, and hi all, and thanks, Geoff, for your presentation. It's really stimulating. My question or concern is about a sort of higher level, upper level governance sort of issue. How can it be we're having a governmental commissioner for the environment and all the work that your team is doing, and it's probably quite a bit of effort and very well founded replies and concerns, that this is somehow not binding? I mean, how can it be that the current government is sort of running roughshod over all these concerns, just sort of coming up with tinkering around here? I mean, during the campaign, the current coalition sort of was saying, oh, we let the ETS sort everything out. I remember that clearly, and we don't do anything else. You guys are showing that it is flawed. There's a high risk attached to it, and we hear nothing about it. Like, I'm an avid news follower and looking at issues that are around this area, and we're having government that seems like the commissioner is completely toothless or is sort of put in a position, or anyway, I'm really frustrated, and maybe you share this frustration. I'd just like to know your sort of insights, where you say what sort of rules or legislation needs to be changed to give more weight to what you guys are finding.
Well, look, we're essentially an advisory body, so much like the Climate Commission, all care and no responsibility. So Parliament is sovereign, and that's the way a representative democracy works. So ultimately, I mean, our job is to make sure that they're making informed decisions, and that's it's if the public aren't happy with what they're doing, then that's what voting's for.
That we could lead off a conversation from there, but let me go to Jack, who's been waiting for a while to ask a question.
Yeah, thanks, Geoff. I hadn't quite appreciated the dynamic you described, whereby the ETS and the pricing for pine is actually a disincentive to reduce fossil fuel use. Because it's so much more profitable to invest in the pine. And given the, I don't know whether you've seen the recent report from the Breakthrough Institute in Australia, which summarized some of the data from Hansen and Rockstrom and others, looking at the inadequacy of the targets for both the Paris Agreement and the nationally determined contributions, pointing out that we're racing past 1.5, and those targets are totally inadequate. So the imperative to reduce emissions and not do the fancy accounting stuff, seems increasingly obvious. And can the ETS reforms actually be effective, or do we need some alternatives like rationing of fossil fuels so that we have some certainty about the controlling the emissions? Is given that the Commission is looking at the broader issue, that your department is looking at the broader issue than just climate, and do you have a position, or is there any consideration about the adequacy of the targets in the first place? And secondly, has any thought at all been given to a more effective way of controlling emissions, say through rationing of fossil fuels?
mean, I think just to take your first question, I mean, it's very clear that the world is not going to keep to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That I don't think that should prevent us from continuing to to work in this space. No matter what temperature increase we end up at, it's always going to be better having a lower number than a bigger number. There is no number that spells doom for everyone. It's just a graduating scale of of how bad things will eventually get. You know, climate emissions reductions is a global collective action problem. So the degree to which we take action is always going to be a political question. There is no right target for us. As Winston Peters pointed out, our emissions are a sneeze in the night. They are small internationally, but as other people point out, if you take all the small people and add them up, small countries and add them up, they're actually bigger than bigger than the big guys. New Zealand is dependent on everyone taking action, so I certainly believe that we need to be taking action ourselves. Forestry was initially brought in as a as a way to buy us time, because when New Zealand signed up to Kyoto in 1990, it was more difficult for us to reduce emissions than most countries. So forestry was brought in to buy us time, but that argument is really getting weaker and weaker, and we are the only country to rely on forestry to the extent that we do in reducing our emissions. And as you say, we're ultimately at the risk of it biting us, coming back to bite us. Onto whether there's more effective ways of reducing emissions. I mean, I think the international consensus is that complementary policies are needed. You can't just rely on a price. What works in different sectors is really differs. Transport emissions, for example. I mean, the big driver there that we don't often talk about in New Zealand is urban form, is the way we design our cities, the way to their credit, to his credit, I think the sort of changes that Chris Bishop is trying to do with planning really could really make a big difference in terms of, and this is continuing what the Labor government did under the National Policy Statement of Urban Development. I think that could make quite a big difference. If you get more people living around those really big public transport routes and you build up and you create denser neighborhoods, I think there's, internationally that shows that can hugely reduce emissions from, both from our housing, but also from our travel and the way that we live. So So yeah, absolutely, we need alternative policies.
Yeah, can I just do a follow-up to that? Of course, we need to keep at it, but it seems to me that the issue of what our targets are is critically important because of the consequences of not staying in a safe, stable state. 1.5 is between, as I understand it, I'm not an earth scientist, but as I understand the earth science, the stability of the Holocene at a planetary scale was one planetary state. The next stable state is in excess of 3 degrees warming above the Holocene. And that would be extremely unfavorable to our civilization. So the in-between temperatures, yes, obviously, every tenth of a degree we can reduce, the better. But all of it's an unstable state. And so having targets that are stable states that are favorable to our living arrangements seem incredibly important. And it seems to me that that's the sort of issue that the Parliamentary Commission for the Environment might be able to address. I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I mean, there are you know, there are obviously concerns that there are tipping points. I don't think there is any you know, there's no incontrovertible evidence of that being the case, though. So, you know, I think the consensus on this stuff is that, you know, more emissions will, you know, increase prices, increase temperatures. From what I've seen, we're headed for sort of, you know, at the moment we're headed for the sort of mid twos, on the basis of what everyone has promised. But you know, like I said, ultimately this is a collective action problem. It's not something that New Zealand could solve by itself. Even if we got our emissions to zero, we can't you know, that's not going to guarantee a certain global temperature rise, unfortunately.
No, but if we could, it would be an enormous example of how to do it. So it's worth trying, it seems to me.
I mean,
Okay.
yeah, I certainly think it is, you know, I certainly think we should be doing what we can. And I don't think that is the case at the moment.
Right.
Okay. I've noticed that Peter Olorenshaw has put a couple of comments in the chat, which I'm not actually monitoring. But Peter, would you like to make your points? I can't see Peter, so
I'll give him a chance.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, great.
Yeah, hi, Geoff. I missed the start of your talk. Sorry. So you may have covered it, but I don't think so. It's just I'm just wondering whether the wilding pine thing is something that we should actually let go. You know, these conifers are frantically gobbling up carbon, and whether it's worthwhile the effort and carbon to prevent them when it's actually unnatural anyway. These tussock landscapes are unnatural. They weren't here before humans came to New Zealand. You know, for instance, Pākehā pioneers found totara logs in the Mackenzie country. So if it's unnatural, why don't we actually let this natural afforestation happen? your comments.
I mean, it's a, you know, what's the definition of a weed? Do you know what the definition of a weed is?
I planted the wrong place.
Yeah, it's subjective, right?
Mm.
It's subjective. I mean, all I would say about your about your proposal is that it would have pretty big hydrological impacts for you know, for Canterbury and Otago if we were to do that. You know, some of the modelling I've seen about the amount of, I mean, they gobble up they gobble up carbon, but they also gobble up water at the same time, and it could, you know, if the problem really got out of hand, and you know, we've decided that there are weeds, so if it got out of hand, it could, you know, really upset the hydrological you know, patterns of Canterbury and Otago, and could have some pretty big downstream impacts, which I should also point out that's not just our farms, that's also our energy, you know, a big chunk of our energy supply because of the Waitaki river dam system. So yeah, I mean there's pretty big implications from doing that, potentially.
Okay.
Thank you.
May I draw?
Joe, there are Sue Maturin put in a comment about methane, followed by another comment by Kaz. I just wondered if you wanted to ask them to speak to those. And then there's two more comments after that by Dougal and Chris.
Sure. Actually, I would invite anyone who wants to make comments to make them verbally orally to everyone, because they may be interesting discussion points, and it's quite hard to monitor the chat as well as the screen. So is there anyone who would like to deliver their comments orally?
Sue was the first one to put hers up, if she's still here with us. Sue Maturin.
It's Chris Lucas here.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Chris.
Please go ahead.
So my comment to Geoff is that, Geoff, you said that New Zealand's in the emissions scene globally is a small fish, basically, and we make little difference. But that's not my, in contact with, extensive contact with people, particularly in China, I don't think that's correct, because they are very well aware, in my experience, that New Zealand, for example, can easily reduce its emissions compared with China, much more easily than China, and that we're not. And they say to me, why should we reduce our emissions and control and constrain our standard of living when you don't? And so what I'm saying is that our lack of action has actually a significant impact well beyond the size of our emissions.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's exactly what I was saying, Chris. I totally agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm saying some people argue that we don't have a big impact, but I don't think that is the case.
Yeah. Yes, you certainly made that clear. Dougal, would you like to put your question?
Yeah, hi everyone. Geoff, I'm sorry I I missed the first part of your talk also, so I'm sorry if this is a something you've covered. But I did catch you say something to the effect, I thought, that pines are massively more effective in capturing carbon than native forests, and that conflicts a bit with my understanding, which may be wrong, but I understood that native forest continues to capture carbon potentially for hundreds of years. It doesn't basically stop. And if you plant pines, they're good for the cycle of the pines, perhaps 25 or 30 years or something. And that's it. They've captured the carbon, and you're forced to replant that block in pines simply to remain neutral. And you've locked up that area of land forever, basically, from any other land use. And I'm a hydrologist. Yeah, I'm a hydrologist. Yep. I agree with the problem of yield too. We've had problems in Kakanui here, but I think
that's right, Dougal.
Yeah, you might capture carbon more quickly initially, but surely much better, and there's much more to be gained by planting natives for the longer term gains.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about, anyone trying to do this for a buck. People don't have investment timeframes of 250 years. Pine is like I was saying. So when I was comparing pine to native, that I gave the example I gave was over a 50-year time period. So pine soaks up 4 times as much carbon over 50 years than natives do. Pines do, depending on the circumstances, keep growing out to 70, 80, maybe 90 years. But you're right, in the long term, natives do capture a lot more. But anyone who's anyone who's planting trees to try and make a buck out of the emissions trading scheme, it's much cheaper to plant pine, and they soak up carbon much quicker. So certainly within most people's lifetimes, pine's going to be far and away the better return on investment. But I totally agree that for our nation in the long run, particularly on the land that we want to be permanently afforested, which is our really tricky, erosion-prone land, that would be better off being in natives.
Yeah. No, thank you. I've sort of.
It's just the question, Dougal, is how do we get the incentives for people to do that? That's the question.
Yeah. Well, I've kind of reached the point where I think pines are a total distraction, and we should be planting natives everywhere. Bugger the people who are trying to make a buck out of it. We've got people buying land out here in North Otago and planting it in pines and then just taking off and just leaving it, and they're earning money by doing that. It reduces the yield. It's basically another form of debt for future generations. They can't change the land use unless they buy back the carbon credits. So
that is.
I think it's time we stop talking about pines, not to mention the social implications for rural areas,
Yeah.
Anyway.
That was the sort of stuff I was talking about early on. So, yep, I totally agree with you there. Yeah.
Thank you.
We just have a little bit of time left, and I wonder if I might put something to you, Geoff, that I would find very useful to take away from this, and that is over the next year or so, we'll be looking towards the next elections, hopefully talking to our MPs and other candidates, and most desirably talking about this extremely crucial issue. And I wonder if you are at all able to encapsulate the sort of message about ETS reform that you wish we would convey on the issues that you've been talking about tonight, which are very complex, but we're going to need to find a way to put them in a simpler form, to try to get policies that will make sense for our future.
Yeah, I mean, simply, I would just say we've got to get forestry out of the ETS, and then we can have the ETS becomes a scheme to encourage people to reduce their emissions. And you can use the money to figure out how to get people to plant the right tree in the right place.
That is suitably simple. I can take that away. That's very good, Geoff. Thank you.
Yes.
I see Kaz also has a question.
That's right.
Kaz, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just kind of typing it into the to the chat. So I'm a bit tired. Right. What was coming really clear to me in this last discussion is there's actually a major issue of values here and timeframes. And this is because we put ourselves in the context of ETS and financial reward for doing anything good, right? So the timeframe thing is a society that doesn't think in terms of generations ahead, that people are basically thinking about their next year's bank account, or maybe, 5 years bank account, with a business plan and all the rest. But that actually the whole construction that we're operating under is that it's okay to think in terms of financial reward and to actually think about, 7 generations ahead and what kind of future that means, or, how good it is to live in a situation where your climate isn't likely to destroy your home, or your friends, or you. And that's really what the problem that we're facing. So actually the bigger the context here, it's like the context of kind of contemporary economics. Economics is a fake science. It's based on something that actually, in real terms, doesn't exist, right? We made up money, but, we made it up. We're now letting it control us. And so there's a much, much bigger question for me here, or 2 bigger questions. It's like, what are actually incentives? How do you look at really changing people's values? Because if we don't, then the slippery slope that we're on just seems kind of inevitable. Sorry. And of course, there's possibilities of other ways of living. Other people in the world do live differently, do have different values. But, if long as we accept that these values are actually okay, it's hard to see how one can really do much except for what's that metaphor? Moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. Anyway, that's what it came to me. And I was thinking about the terms of the debates as they're going on. And it's like, well, don't worry too much about tiny forests because, it's only small. It's like, no, actually, if lots of people do it, it gets really big.
You're inviting Geoff to comment on that?
Yes,
Kaz?
please. Yes, do.
I mean, I don't really have any comment. I mean, I agree. I don't know if it's a reflection of economics or just human psychology. We are short term. We do seem to have short term horizons. So I agree.
The culture has short-term horizons, like people don't necessarily. Māori don't, and lots of other peoples don't. So there's lots of things we can be and think and value.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a cultural challenge.
With that, I will need to draw things to a close. I think first of all, I want to thank you very much, Geoff. As I said, I came to this webinar with a lot of questions. You have answered most of them. I can retain your threefold takeaway of getting forestry out of the ETS, using the ETS to actually reduce emissions, and using the revenue for native planting. That's quite an accomplishment, I think, to leave people with something that they can hold in their heads and take away and use as we proceed to interrogate politicians. So thank you for a very effective talk, which is on a hugely important matter for all of us. Let me, with our thanks, Geoff, let me close with a karakia. And this karakia refers to the time that we spend together to think through these difficult issues as a tapu time. And now we're going to set that tapu aside and return to our ordinary things. Kia whakaaeria te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia turuki whakataha ai, kia turuki whakataha ai, haumie, huie, taikie. Thank you.
Kia ora.
And thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Be well.
Good night,
you, Judy.
everyone.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Thank you.
Kia ora.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.